It was 10 p.m. when he got the call. Jorge and his 7-year-old son would, according to the reporting by Abram Lustgarten in the New York Times Magazine, put their lives into the hands of a coyote to guide them from their hometown of Alta Verapaz in Guatemala across several borders to the doorsteps of the United States. Lustgarten goes on to write that Jorge wasn't leaving his whole world behind on a whim. He was a relatively successful farmer until 5 years of drought followed by torrential rains and floods exacerbated by climate change meant that harvest after harvest lay dead or drowned in his fields. Jorge is one of millions forced to make impossible choices because of the climate crisis. He could either stay in Alta Verapaz and try to survive under untenable conditions, or upend his entire life to hopefully find prospects in a foreign land. As the climate crisis continues to grow worse, more and more people will be forced into these kinds of decisions. The world is facing a growing population of people displaced by climate chaos. And as we will soon see, countries in the imperial core are actively shoring up their walls to keep climate refugees out. This video was made in collaboration with Second Thought. Make sure to check out their video on ecofascism and climate refugees after watching this. Over the course of the next 80 years, the world will increasingly be on the move. Whether due to distinct climate change-linked disasters like hurricanes, or through longer-term events like drought and sea level rise, a changing climate will displace an estimated 200 to 300 million people globally by 2100. Of those 200 to 300 million climate refugees, 80% are people displaced internally within their countries, while the other 20% are projected to move from their home countries to those in the imperial core. Indeed, a comprehensive report by the World Bank Group found that by 2050, climate change will displace 143 million people internally in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and Latin America combined. And just within the last decade, weather-related events triggered an estimated 23.1 million displacements of people on average each year, according to the World Meteorological Organization. With hotter global temperatures comes droughts, making previously arable land unfarmable, sea level rise drowning coastal towns, and extreme weather events forcing people to move from rural to urban areas in search of jobs and safer housing. But cities aren't equipped politically or infrastructurally for the influx of people displaced within borders. Internal displacement has already given rise to sprawling makeshift cities on the outskirts of urban centers. Lacking governmental support and accessible public housing, refugees and those looking for work are forced to dwell in informal settlements under harsh conditions. Conditions which breed resentment towards local governments. We are already witnessing the cracks climate change displacement is causing. Like the severe drought made more likely by climate change that drove rural farmers into cities, sparking uprisings and civil wars called the Arab Spring, a series of conflicts that forced millions across international borders. So the movement of millions of people within countries can add fuel to an already roaring fire, often sparking conflicts and in turn forcing many to leave their home country in search of less climate and conflict-racked homes. But as we've already seen with rhetoric surrounding refugees, movement across borders is not simple. Refugees are often met with hatred or are turned away, usually through force. Indeed, with the growing chaos of climate change, countries in the imperial core seem more focused on building walls than lending a hand. When Jorge reached the US border, he was met with a literal wall. To search for a way to live and support his wife and the rest of his family back home, Jorge had to scale that 20-foot steel barrier with his son and drop down on the other side. The border wall Jorge was forced to scale epitomizes the imperial core's approach to the growing number of people displaced by climate change. Rich countries spew fossil fuel emissions into the atmosphere with impunity, while those in the imperial periphery suffer the brunt of the consequences. And when people in the periphery hit hardest by climate chaos seek asylum in the core, they are met with walls and militarized borders. Borders that one paper finds are exacerbating already dire situations for refugees. To make matters worse, countries in the imperial core responsible for the bulk of historical emissions only seem to be strengthening their borders. A report by the Transnational Institute found that 7 of the largest historical emitters, responsible for 48% of the world's emissions, increased their border security spending by 29% from 2013 to 2018. In particular, in Europe, the budget for the European Union Border Agency, Frontex, has increased by a whopping 2,763% since its founding in 2006. While the United States has tripled their border and immigration enforcement budget since 2003. The imperial core is hardening their walls in a time when they need to be tearing them down and sending climate reparations to the periphery. Those 7 countries responsible for 48% of historical emissions spent double the amount on borders than they did on climate finance from 2013 to 2018. And to add insult to injury, the amount that the imperial core has paid to the imperial periphery, some $34 billion according to Oxfam, is a meager sum. The Transnational Institute and indeed Bolivia argue that just climate payments, ones that would actually repair the damage caused by the imperial core, would have to be somewhere in the range of $3 trillion per year, or roughly 6% of the core's GDP. Essentially, the actions of these countries seem to show that they are much more interested in keeping people out than actually helping the countries they've preyed on for centuries adapt and mitigate to the climate change they've caused. This border escalation and lack of climate reparations seems very much like the beginnings of eco-fascist lifeboat ethics, which claims that in times of environmental chaos, it is not only ethical, but in the best interest of rich countries to deny those in the periphery access to needed resources in order to survive. But this border escalation in the US and other core countries isn't just some coincidence. In fact, the ties between contractors who patrol borders and fossil fuel companies are a lot closer than you might think. When we dive into who exactly is arming the borders of the imperial core, a broader picture of fossil fuel imperialism becomes clear. Defense contractors like G4S, Palantir, and L3 Harris that contract with governments to militarize borders and expand surveillance nets also contract with fossil fuel corporations to defend oil infrastructure. Mercenaries from G4S, for example, were the armed guards violently cracking down on Dakota Access Pipeline protests. ExxonMobil hired L3 Harris to maintain maritime domain awareness of its drilling in the Niger Delta, and BP used Palantir to develop a repository of all operated wells' historical and real-time drilling data. The link between fossil fuel companies and border security corporations is so strong that former heads of border security contracting companies sat on the boards of fossil fuel companies like Chevron. Digging down into the root cause of the growing climate refugee crisis will inevitably lead you to the fossil fuel industry. The fingerprints of fossil fuels seem to be at almost every crime scene that have led to the forced displacement of people. Fossil fuels were at the heart of the Iraq War and have enabled Russia's violent invasion of Ukraine. They've padded the pocketbooks of surveillance and border patrol contractors, and they've upended the lives of millions of people already. The border defense industry and the fossil fuel industry heavily profit off of being the root causes of the climate crisis. And in doing so, they exacerbate the consequences of war, drought, and disasters which are throwing millions of lives into chaos. Dismantling and eradicating both the fossil fuel industry and the border defense industry is not radical. It's the only path forward. Are open borders the solution to the rise of climate refugees in the 21st century? Yes, they could be, but it also doesn't solve the root problem. While open border policies could lessen the toll of moving to a completely foreign land, it still means that people have to upend their lives. So what is the best path forward in the face of the coming climate storms? First, a rapid transition to a zero-carbon world is crucial. Every degree of warming avoided means less severe droughts, less sea level rise, fewer extreme weather events, and ultimately fewer people displaced by a changing climate. So that should be priority number one. And key to that mission is the prioritization of climate reparations from the imperial core to the imperial periphery, helping countries hit hardest by climate change not only adapt, but forge a renewable economy. Channeling funds to help the periphery deal with the crisis within their borders that the imperial core has created could mean that people like Jorge don't have to make impossible choices. As one paper on climate refugees and hardening borders notes, reducing inequality between countries would also decrease the need and benefit to use international migration as an adaptation solution. Climate migration, then, should be seen as a failure of the imperial core and a symptom of global inequality, not an inevitability. It is a costly adaptation strategy that is born out of the imperial core turning the other way when they should be in the trenches helping stack sandbags for the coming storm. If you're looking for more on the connections between eco-fascism, imperialism, and climate refugees, definitely make sure to check out Second Thought's video linked below. In it, he dives into how anti-immigration sentiments evolve hand in hand with fossil fuel and eco-fascism. It's definitely worth a watch. Unfortunately, videos like these, while very important, do terribly with the YouTube algorithm and sponsors don't want to touch them. But there is a way you can help. Becoming an OCC Patreon supporter helps Our Changing Climate stay afloat and independent. As an OCC patron, you'll not only gain early access to videos, but also special behind-the-scenes updates and a members-only Discord channel. In addition, each month, my supporters vote on an environmental group that I then donate a portion of my monthly revenue to. Patreon supporters are the financial backbone of the Our Changing Climate operation. Without them, I wouldn't be able to take creative risks and dive into difficult topics. So if you want to help keep this channel alive or are feeling generous, head over to patreon.com/ourchangingclimate or use the link in the description and become an OCC patron. If you're not interested or aren't financially able to, then no worries. You can help the channel out by subscribing, liking the video, and commenting. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I will see you in 2 weeks.